Welcome to The Explainer. We've got a massive, high-stakes mystery to unpack today. It's the kind of complex, cinematic story you could honestly spend hours getting lost in. We are looking at exactly why nations pursue the ultimate weapons, why some miraculously decide to just walk away from them, and perhaps most importantly, what these historical lessons reveal about the terrifying, rapidly accelerating future of artificial intelligence. We're going to take a deep dive right into the underlying architecture of global competition. So, let's get into it. I want you to plunge yourself into this core paradox. For decades, the dominant assumption in global politics was pretty simple. Every nation would naturally want a nuclear bomb for their own security. But history just didn't play out that way. Why do some nations completely sacrifice their economies and international standing to build these weapons, while others, who absolutely have the technology to do it, willingly give it up? The answer isn't just about military strategy. It's actually about domestic survival. Section 1. The Proliferation Paradox. It is fascinating to reframe the decision to go nuclear. Instead of looking at it as an international security issue, think of it as a domestic political survival strategy. It's kind of like two competing business models for a country. On one side, we have what's called inward-looking coalitions. These leaders rely heavily on nationalism, import substitution, and state-run industries. For them, a nuclear program is a massive political asset. It justifies extreme language, rallies their base, and fuels a military-industrial complex. But on the other side, we have internationalizing models. These states absolutely need global market access, foreign investment, and strong exports. For them, a nuclear weapon is a total, catastrophic liability. It triggers heavy sanctions and scares off investors. Their political survival literally depends on economic openness, which means firmly rejecting the bomb. Moving on to Section 2, How States Build Bombs, the Clandestine Mechanics. Okay, so once a state actually decides it needs a bomb, it faces a logistical and diplomatic nightmare. I mean, how do you build a weapon of mass destruction when the entire world is actively trying to stop you? Well, scholars have identified 4 distinct strategies for pulling this off. First, you have the sprinters. They make a mad, overt dash for the weapon because they're facing immediate, high-security threats. Then you have hedgers. They build up all the infrastructure but stop just short of final assembly, basically keeping their options open. Next are the hiders, who work in absolute, total secrecy because they lack powerful friends on the global stage. And finally, you have sheltered pursuers. And that brings us to a really great analogy. Sheltered pursuit is essentially like a younger sibling picking a fight while hiding behind a much bigger brother. Historically, certain countries were able to develop their clandestine capabilities simply because they relied on the tacit shelter of superpowers. For example, back in the 1960s, Israel advanced its program with tacit support from the US. And by 2006, North Korea achieved its goals with the partial sheltering support of China. Without that massive superpower shield, international pressure would have crushed those programs almost instantly. Which brings us to Section 3, the power of umbrellas and taboos. Let's talk about the nuclear umbrella first. Think of it like a highly armed, incredibly serious neighborhood watch. If the most powerful house on your block completely guarantees your safety, you don't really need to spend your life savings on your own personal alarm system, right? Extended security guarantees, like NATO or specific bilateral treaties between the US and Japan or South Korea, act as massive deterrents to proliferation. The shadow of these security guarantees gave conservative leaders in countries like Japan, Sweden, and Germany the political breathing room to justify nuclear abstinence to their own citizens. And that leads us to something incredibly profound: the nuclear taboo. Now, this goes way beyond a simple tradition. The taboo isn't just about non-use, it's a deeply ingrained normative belief. Sociologists actually call it a sociology of danger, basically a ritual avoidance. The global community collectively decided to categorize the first use of nuclear weapons as an unthinkable transgression. It fundamentally shifted the identity of what it means to be a civilized state. And over time, this taboo actually stabilized mutual deterrence between superpowers, while completely delegitimizing the idea of using these weapons against non-nuclear states. Eventually, this taboo was officially codified into international law through the Non-Proliferation Treaty, or the NPT. But the NPT is built on a really fascinating, explicit paradox. It legally cemented a totally hierarchical order. It essentially said, okay, the 5 states that tested weapons before 1967 get to keep them, and literally nobody else can ever have them. Why? Because the international community decided that horizontal proliferation, meaning more hands on the button, was the ultimate threat to global survival. They essentially traded sovereign equality for species survival. Section 4, Taboos and Nuclear Reversals, Surrendering Power. Let's look at the incredible timeline of South Africa. They are the only country in history to fully build a secret homegrown nuclear arsenal and then voluntarily take the whole thing apart. Driven by severe isolation and regional conflicts, they secretly built six-gun-type fission weapons by the late 1980s. But then, as the Cold War ended and the domestic government prepared for a historic changeover from apartheid to a majority-elected government, they reversed course entirely. By 1989, they tore the weapons apart. They chose international credibility, regional stability, and reintegration into the global economy over holding on to a finite deterrence arsenal. It was a massive pivot. So what actually drove these massive reversals? Well, it was really about defying the realist concept of self-help. Nations faced a very stark choice: maintain ultimate military power and remain a global pariah, or voluntarily disarm and be welcomed back into the civilized international community. And the discourse of civilization is a very powerful one. Complying with the community's norms is basically the price of admission for political acceptance and crucial economic assistance. This crucial point is perfectly captured in a 1994 quote from Ukrainian President Leonid Kuchma. When the Soviet Union collapsed, Ukraine technically found itself with thousands of nuclear warheads sitting on its territory. Realist military strategy would scream at them to keep those weapons to deter future aggression. But Kuchma argued to his parliament that keeping them would make Ukraine a rogue nation. They chose community over unilateral power, transferring the weapons to Russia in exchange for security assurances. They literally traded physical weapons for normative standing. Now we're shifting gears to Section 5, the new arms race, governing AI. To really wrap our heads around both the historical nuclear arms race and the modern AI arms race, we have to look at a game-theoretic concept called a structural tragedy. Now, this isn't just about bad people making bad choices. It is a mathematical coordination failure. It's a scenario where every single actor makes a completely rational, defensive choice for their own survival, but those individual choices inevitably lock the entire system into a collectively disastrous outcome. A system basically falls into this tragic coordination failure when it hits these rigid conditions. You have multiple independent actors. Pushing forward harms others. Defecting yields a higher payoff for the individual. And crucially, there is almost no way to enforce cooperation. Once these conditions lock in, the system just escalates, regardless of the good intentions of the people inside it. Now let's draw a stark contrast here. We survived the nuclear age, sure, but look at the differences between nuclear weapons and artificial intelligence. Nuclear weapons require massive, highly visible infrastructure. We're talking uranium mines and giant centrifuges. They have massive entry barriers, and they are easily verifiable by international inspectors. AI is the exact opposite. It has incredibly low entry barriers. At the end of the day, it's just code and compute. It is mathematically inseparable from commercial use. You can't build a peaceful supercomputer that can't also be used for cyber warfare. And the scariest part? It moves at the speed of software, not the speed of uranium enrichment. And that is exactly why AI governance is structurally harder than anything we've ever faced as a species. You cannot simply send an international inspector into a lab to verify that a neural network isn't dangerous. Economic and military imperatives are totally converged. The exact same AI model that cures cancer can be prompted to design a bioweapon. There is literally no distinction between the civilian and military applications at the foundational level. The historical successes we had with the nuclear taboo face absolutely overwhelming structural barriers when applied to AI. Researchers have actually quantified these conditions into what they call a tragedy index, and the results are honestly chilling. When you score the intensity of the coordination difficulty, attempting to govern transformative AI breakthroughs is orders of magnitude harder than coordinating climate change treaties, preventing bank runs, or even the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. The structural incentives to defect and just accelerate AI development are simply too high, and our ability to verify cooperation is almost zero. If you want real-world validation of how fast these structural traps snap shut, just look at the modern Russia-Ukraine drone war. We've had international dialogues about governing autonomous weapons for years now, but the very second existential competitive pressure was applied on the battlefield, both sides escalated from deploying dozens of drones to thousands every single month. It was driven entirely by competitive necessity. When survival is on the line, any aspirations of international coordination are instantly obliterated by the structural mandate to escalate. But hey, this structural tragedy doesn't just apply to weapons, it actually applies to our daily lives. Take the productivity puzzle. Back in 1930, the economist John Maynard Keynes predicted that by the year 2000, technological progress would give us a 15-hour work week. Since then, technological productivity has increased 8-fold. So why are we still out here working 40, 50, or 60 hours a week? Well, because of the exact same tragic logic. firms are locked in a coordination failure. Any single company that reduces hours loses out to a competitor that doesn't. The competitive architecture forces a continuous escalation of output, absorbing every ounce of those productivity gains.
So, this brings us to the ultimate takeaway of our entire explainer today. Whether we are looking at the terrifying calculus of nuclear arsenals, the exhausting reality of modern labor hours, or the existential race towards superintelligence, the barriers to coordination are not just about bad politicians or greedy corporations. They are deeply structural. The underlying competitive architecture itself dictates the outcome. We are playing a game where the rules inevitably force us to sprint toward the edge.
We relied on decades of slow-moving diplomacy, cultural taboos, and global treaties to survive the nuclear age. But as the structural tragedy of AI accelerates, we have to ask, can our modern institutions survive a technology that moves fundamentally faster than the speed of diplomacy? The architecture of competition is pulling us forward whether we like it or not. The real question is, can we figure out how to rewrite the rules of the game before the clock runs out?